Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
John Fox is the founder and president of the Institute for Poetic Medicine. The Institute serves many constituencies, especially people who are living on the margins, people in prison, people with suffering from brain injuries, the homeless. And the Institute is all about making connections with ourselves, with our fellow human beings, with the natural world, and with the divine. And John, I would argue that John has played a critical role in establishing poetry as a distinct and powerful form of medicine. He's also run one of the best programs our foundation has ever been involved in. And I said this a few years ago, I'll say it again, that even though John has no formal medical training, I do see him as a physician in the truest sense of the word, who facilitates healing at the deepest level. So please welcome my dear friend, John Fox.
Good morning. Toby, thank you. And Michael, thank you. So poetry is a pathway to tenderness and comfort, truth-telling, and transformation. I'm thankful to Commonweal for inviting me to participate this weekend. Thanks to Michael Lerner, and thanks to my dear friend Toby Symington, I offer a deep gusho to Toby for the ways he influences my life. That includes the Lloyd Symington Family Foundation, which back in the early 2000s helped to fund my work, my poetry therapy work with cancer patients across the country. I also offer a deep appreciation to Rachel Naomi Remen. Nearly 30 years ago, in 1996, Rachel wrote her wise and lovely preface to my book, Poetic Medicine, The Healing Art of Poem Making. Welcome to the Commonweal staff. Welcome to my co-presenters, and welcome to all of you, the public in attendance. When I was in 4th grade, I spent a week in the hospital for surgery on my right leg. This surgery wasn't the first time. Between the ages of 4.5 and 18, I had 7 significant surgeries on my right leg and foot. I was born with a genetic disorder, neurofibromatosis. In my case, it was a segmental version of that of NF. It affected my lower right leg. This time, I came back to Boulevard School with a cast using crutches. Crutches were familiar to me, and I was swinging confidently down the aisle between desks. My right crutch caught on one of those 3-pronged desk wings, and I fell flat on my face. I turned over, stunned. My teacher, Mrs. Carol Baird, came over to me. She stopped. I think she knelt. She leaned down and kissed me on the forehead. She leaned down and kissed me on the forehead. I'll never forget her face looking at me, her soft face with a gentle brightness. Her kiss, an act of tenderness and comfort, I will never forget. I was 9 years old. I'm not saying to you I was only 9 years old. I'm not saying I was just 9 years old. Those words diminish the profundity of that moment, the simplicity. There is no way to quantify or qualify that moment. That immense moment stays in eternity, a pause in time. My soul and body received her kiss. In that vulnerable, awkward, embarrassing experience, I learned tenderness and comfort are real. I experienced what they feel like. I learned they could be given. I didn't think about it. I didn't think now there was tenderness and comfort. Yet that kiss is the only thing I remember from 4th grade. My soul and body remember. I'm going to, a little aside, I think this is connected to what Michael is talking about. I talked with Michael last evening about, we have to have a different understanding of time. I have a note written by Mrs. Baer to my mother about how impressed she was by the report I spoke to the class about Germany and its artists. And this was 1964. I have no memory of it. I fell down on crutches, her kiss, that was it. This morning, let us consider how tenderness and comfort begin in our lives. Tenderness isn't something you can study. What is tenderness? What is tenderness to you? Does tenderness have a place in relation to your healing practice, your medical practice, your life? What about comfort? I love to sing the earliest call to action in Handel's Messiah. A tenor sings, "Comfort ye my people. Comfort ye my people, saith your God." As much as I decided long ago to live by this compelling admonishment from Isaiah, those melodic, profoundly evocative words are not the same as comforting someone. 9 years after falling on the floor on crutches after that surgery, I was once again in hospital. There were many intervening hospital visits and surgeries. This time it was getting particularly serious. I was about to have my right leg amputated below the knee. I made the decision after a rough year of barely getting by during my freshman year at Boston University. Yeah, I remember it was a somber time at this hospital with a vividly up-sounding name, Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. I remember a nurse, Judy, with a pert haircut and a blue sweater. Judy, who did the intake interview of me as I sat up in my hospital bed. I remember she was quiet, very nice, and yet she didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the pad she wrote on. She angled herself so that she didn't quite face me. I felt she cared and that this questioning interview was hard for her to do. I don't think I'm making this up. Upon reflection, I think it was a genuine, quietly held, human-hearted tension, a serious feeling under her surface. That evening, I took a hot bath. I was back in my hospital bed, covered with a light sheet. It was quite late. I might have been dozing. I don't remember. What I do remember is that a nurse appeared beside my bed. Do you remember back in 1974, all nurses were dressed in white? Anybody remember that? This nurse with long brown hair, it was late and it was dark. This nurse, the white nurse dressed for uniform standing out, I think she was an LPN, not an RN. She let down the rail of my bed. She got into bed and held me. There wasn't anything sexual about it. Not really, yet it was intimate. I was 18. I was being held by this nurse, a young woman, at this very vulnerable time in my life. It was, what does one say? One doesn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Maybe when she heard about my circumstance in this nurse's second shift meeting, she may have thought about doing this. Thought about bringing comfort to me. I like knowing and remembering names, but I don't remember her name. What happened is made sacred and mysterious. Many years later, once I got into poetry and healing and was bringing that regularly to hospitals and medical schools and across the country and abroad, I met Courtney Davis, a superb nurse practitioner and poet. I got to know a poem Courtney wrote. And you have, some of you have a little booklet and it has the poems in it. I want to work in a hospital. That's the name of her. I want to work in a hospital. I want to work in a hospital where it's okay to climb into bed with patients and hold them pre-op or before they lose their legs or breasts or after, to tell them they are still whole, or postpartum when they have just returned from that strange garden, or when they are dying. Or when they are dying. As if it's somehow, because I stay, they are free to go, taking with them the color of my eyes. I want the daylight I walk into, I want the daylight I walk out into to become the flashlight they carry, waving it, so God might find them as we go together into their long night. You may imagine the opening lines of her poem, "Catch me up," and can, when I say them out loud, choke me up. I want to work in a hospital where it's okay to climb into bed with patients and hold them pre-op. And hold them pre-op before they lose their legs. Courtney captured in her poem what happened in my own life. Once again, it happens when reading this poem and I feel less alone. Once again, it happens when speaking this poem, I feel less alone. That less alone is a facet of poetry as healer, letting poems touch us so that they become a companion. My leg was amputated 51 years ago, late May 1974. I could, with precise recollection, share the details of that week. There is that saying, it was like it happened yesterday. Although it is more like it happened right now. Somewhere deep inside my body and soul, this is right now. I'm grateful to Courtney for the courage it may had taken her to, as a nurse, as a medical professional, to say this. It's outside of the typical understood ethical boundaries. That said, I felt comforted. Being held like that made a severe loss to come easier to bear. Wait. I'm not sure that the purpose of being held was to make my experience easier to bear. The true thing is this: another human being was saying to me without words, "You are not alone." That is what Courtney says too, as we go together into their long night. How not being alone is a deep relief. Even as night, the intense metaphor of night, stays for a while and even quite a while. Helping someone feel less alone does not take much expertise. Helping someone feel less alone does not take much expertise. Her poem holds empathy and steadfastness. For me, I'm okay with Courtney, that Courtney brings God into this. I want the daylight I walk into to become the flashlight they carry, waving it so God might find them as we go together into their long night. I want to pause. I want to pause and be thoughtful here as a poetry therapist. Someone else might be turned off by this, by giving energy to that word, using the word God. If someone feels that way, this needs to be honored. The practice of poetry as healer isn't English class. No one is here to accept a poem because I say so. I do love what Courtney says about nursing. When we write about our work, we recreate the sacred space, draw again the shimmering line about the patient and nurse, and draw them together. By revealing the details, the dailiness of nursing, we discover and then teach others the universal truths about life and death, just as we know about life and death. Just as we know the feel of our hands on the patient's body, we have learned these truths by heart. Do you remember, I said a few moments ago about that nurse with a pert, dusty blonde haircut, Judy? Do you remember her? After my amputation, I stayed for a while in the hospital. You know, it was like that back then. You could stay a while. I needed that. One evening, in my wheelchair, I followed Judy around as she went on her rounds. I bore witness to this. Nurse, nurse, nurse. Night shift to Judy. She moves quickly toward the little boy, turtled on his back in a hip-length cast. Her dark blue sweatered arms, attending to the moment, reach to touch and turn him with a soft voice. She makes him more comfortable, more a part of herself, so late into the night. Even now, it's nice to just take a look at the poem. Even now, as it is a wonder I could get outside myself and be aware of how comforting another person matters. I must have felt resonance with that little boy. I had received comfort a few nights before. Making this poem so long ago, I was 18, put me in touch with feeling my way into what the word comfortable is. This is what I share with medical students, that poetry will help them not only consider empathy, tenderness, comfort, but find out what those qualities feel like, to recognize whether these qualities are in or are not in their lives, in their medical practice and training. Nurse, nurse, nurse is a way of seeing. I want medical students who are becoming physicians to do that, see. I want them to look away from their computer screen these days and see a person, see the details of life, her dark blue sweatered arms, to learn what it means to be human. We need poetry. Calling upon one of our more recent ancestors, I believe the greatest gift I can conceive of having from anyone is to be seen by them, to be understood and touched by them. The greatest gift I can give is to see, hear, understand, and touch another person. When this is done, I feel contact has been made. Virginia Satir. Let me point out something about the shape and the lines of the poem Nurse, Nurse, Nurse. I don't think about it having a middle line while writing it, but somehow in making a poem, the fourth and middle line is significant, attending to the moment. A middle line, 3 lines before, 3 lines after. That middle line holds the balance. This is what Judy did. It isn't complicated, but like the poet Charles Olson said, I have had to learn the simplest things last, and that has made for difficulty. I'm so glad, that your laugh gives me real hope there. Seriously. I could tell a story about my first major poet of my life was Winnie the Pooh. But I would go over my time. I'm making these my watchwords, attending to the moment. By attending to the moment, the process of poem making comes alive. How? By inviting me to go forward by feel. I carry with me this quote by Judith Minty because it feels true. Everything I do in this odd business of writing poetry is based on intuition. I have no rules, only patterns I fall into. Most of my reasons for doing what I do, craft-wise, can be answered because it felt right at the time. I will say yes to writing a poem in this way because it felt right at the time. While craft is not focused on in the practice of poetry therapy, I would say to anyone making a poem for healing to stay with what feels right at the time. What a gift it is to stay with what feels right at the time. I'll just read this one. This is a workshop. I appreciate how you were both a facilitator as well as a group member. You know your space and honor others to find their own, and that's beautiful. It helps those of us who are insecure to be freed to write without judgmental criteria. This is a little bit out of context because I'm not saying this, but this wonderful passage by Rainer Maria Rilke. I know that nothing has ever been real without my beholding it. All becoming has needed me. My looking ripens things, and they come toward me to meet and be met. I'd like to explore 2 poems that I believe represent truth-telling and transformation. These poems are written by Richard Osler of British Columbia. I met Richard on one of my visits to Vancouver, probably in about 2006. He was writing and teaching at that time. Richard attended a week-long program, The Nature of Poetry, that I led at Canyon de Chelly with the guidance of John and Lupita McClanahan, my Dene friends. Because of their presence and their guiding us, we had the grace of staying down in the canyon for 6 days. Richard went on to teach poetry around the world, always with an eye to and its ability to heal. But in the last 16 years, his great passion was working with people coping with substance use. He impacted thousands of lives. That's a book. I skipped over it, but he put his poems together at the end of his life. What holiness will I bring? Last summer, I learned from Liz McNally that Richard was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. The prognosis for survival was not good. Richard, along with his beautiful, beloved wife, Somé, agreed together to meet that reality. Their relationship, Somé's willingness to stay open and loving without sacrificing her fierce honesty and humor, and Richard's poem making were essential companions on their journey. Somé asked Richard, "What would you do if you had more time?" He said he'd publish his poems and include the poems that responded to his cancer journey. Richard found words to express a poignant, blunt, and insightful way of speaking what stage 4 was like for him, living with stage 4. Less of this body weighing down the earth, less footsteps in the day, more of seeing the world lying flat on a bed or propped up by pillows, more window to look through, more distancing between the world and me. He's doing some truth-telling here with these lines: less footsteps in a day, more of seeing the world lying flat on a bed. The sense of allowing paradoxes to exist, less and more. To be in proximity with one another. Paradox reminds me of what John Keats said, what he famously called negative capability. I mean negative capability, that is, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Holding paradox in a way that irritation is not felt. My goodness. I can't say much about what Richard felt about this paradox thing. I have a hunch it would ring true to him. I'm certain writing these poems, he nourished something within himself. So I'm going to draw a thread. I'm going to draw a thread through the truth-telling of living stage with stage 4 and pulling that thread through the needle eye of this next poem, which vibrates with the spirit of transformation. Never forget. When I trust words, they become skilled informers of my inner life, guides to the subterranean chambers of my below ego and personality, and I walk there. And words become fireflies in the dark. They burn bright. They burn bright. Remind me, I am both darkness and light. Remind me, right. I think that's a good place to end. Thank you. Thank you.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a savior.